Hi there, and thanks so much for joining us for an exciting conversation as we dive into the state of home buying, buyers' outlook, desires, and deal breakers in 2024. I'm Paige Kelly, and I'll be leading today's conversation. This next half hour or so will be packed full of interesting findings, trends, and perceptions, and we'll share some never-before-released data points. You know, the ones that got left on the cutting room floor. I want to introduce some of our industry experts that have joined us today. From the ServiceLink team, we have Dave Howard, Executive Vice President of Origination Services, and Miriam Moore, Division President of Default Services. Also joining us is Tony Thompson, founder and CEO of NAMBA. That's the National Association of Minority Mortgage Bankers of America. Welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Good to be here.
Great to be here.
So some of the data we'll be discussing today came from the 2024 ServiceLink State of Home Buying Report, where we surveyed more than 1,500 individuals who either bought a home or tried to buy a home in the past 4 years. Okay, let's get started. And for our experts, please feel free to jump in at any time as we want to hear from each of you on these key topics. From interest rates to housing inventory to pricing, much has changed in the mortgage and housing markets since the pandemic. But one thing that's been growing is the hunger and determination of the youngest two generations to become homeowners. The survey found that 63% of Gen Z respondents and 59% of millennial respondents said they plan to purchase a home in 2024, compared to 45% of Gen X and just 21% of baby boomers. So Dave, we'll start with you. Despite their hunger, what do you find is the biggest barrier, particularly for Gen Z and millennials, when it comes to becoming homeowners?
Hey, thanks, Paige. I'd say it's probably the three things that you mentioned. I'm not sure if one particularly stands out. We're looking at a high rate environment, which is really not really a historically high rate environment, more so than a high rate of change from where we were. Inventories are still low; they have not caught up with demand yet, and certainly the price appreciation has been difficult as well. And I know we'll talk about some of the ways that some new generation buyers are going to be able to compete a little bit better. But right now those are probably the three primary barriers. And in my mind, the rate barrier in particular is a bit more of a psychological barrier than a real barrier, because it's really, if you look back at where they've been, rates have been in the 90s and the 2000s, they've been very similar to where they are today. But if you go back to the pandemic boom of low rates, it's the rate of change that people missed out on during that time frame that I think is really giving them cause for pause to jump in and compete in the marketplace.
And, you mentioned it's kind of a psychological barrier there, but are there any other solutions that you could offer them to kind of overcome some of these barriers? Anything come to mind?
Really the right time to buy a house is going to be a personal decision and personal finance decision. But I think what they can do right now really is educate themselves, because as the rates have increased so dramatically, you're seeing lenders do extraordinary things to compete right now, right? Because they're trying to get as many deals as possible that are out there. So there are incentives that are available to new buyers now that various lenders are offering, and even state programs as well that are out there that they can take advantage of. And so probably the best thing that they can do right now is to really educate themselves on the options that are available to see if it fits within their lifestyles.
There's a lot of resources.
Paige, I think this is a great moment for lenders, as I like to say, in terms of connecting and engaging with today's consumers who are young, millennial, and or female, and or multicultural. Many of these young buyers of today don't know what they don't know. And in today's point, one of the things that we always encourage lenders is you have to look at now more than ever, particularly since we're moving from a post low rate environment to a normal rate environment, many would say the most important thing to really look at as a lender is how can we engage with the consumer who is a female, who may be a millennial, who may be a Gen Z, and provide them with the right information around financial home ownership, the benefit of home ownership, and most importantly, what that journey looks like and it entails to them and how they can start that. And I think once lenders realize that we have to start looking at putting people in the top of our funnel, and that now there's going to be a longer cycle time per se in terms of getting someone from engagement to the closing table, that education piece is becoming very critical.
Absolutely, Tony. And I think that Gen Z millennials, as we know, are very willing to take that self-serve approach, do a little bit of their own research. So lenders making sure that their websites, have resources for those consumers and being up to date, I think is another great thing for them to keep in mind. Miriam, anything else to add to that?
I think I agree with everyone's comments regarding the interest rate environment. I think another challenge is really just the fact that homes are appreciating at a rapid rate. Year over year, home prices have increased 5.5%. And I think this younger generation needs to really think about what they expect from a home and perhaps temper their expectations of their dream home. I found an interesting study on NAR that said that buying a fixer upper home, for example, has a price point of 29% lower than a move-in ready home. And so I think one of the things that we could educate this younger generation of buyers about also is maybe looking for maybe some of those deals would make certainly home affordability challenges a little easier.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later about some of those high expectations. Dave,
yeah, and certainly, Miriam, I think we were, you and I were chit-chatting the other day about the value of sweat equity, and maybe even the return that would be available to them might even be higher with the sweat equity option than the, like you were saying, the move-in ready option. It's the willingness to do some work.
Yes.
Completely. So a follow-up, and this is for anybody who'd like to take this question. Why do you think Gen X and baby boomers aren't as eager to buy in 2024?
Well, for me, it comes down to just really one thing. When you look at that cohort of buyers, they're pretty much content with where they are today from what they've seen in the past, from both a housing stock selection and availability to also looking at knowing that they potentially are in a position where they have the best rates that they've had. And so, what we've seen is this cohort that is a little bit more mature in terms of their age, in terms of their workforce, seems to kind of say, you know what, I'm content where I am, although maybe I would like to move. I don't have a sense of urgency to move. Whereas when you look at and on the contrast with the millennial and the Gen Z, they're in their parents' garage and or basement. They are just beginning to really grow their careers, or they are beginning to certainly combine and start and raise a family. And so those needs we're seeing are being driving forces, Paige, in regards to this cohort of buyers. Having set out over the last 3 to 4 years since they may have graduated or entered into the workforce, and seeing their family and friends move across the different countries from a work from home environment, they now want to have an opportunity to find their own place, settle down, and most importantly, begin to build equity into a place that they call home themselves.
Absolutely. Good points. Good points, Tony. Okay, well, we're going to switch gears back to Gen Z and millennials for a moment. Our survey also found that these young buyers have a more optimistic view of the housing market in 2024, despite all that may be stacked against them. 56% of Gen Z respondents and 51% of millennial respondents said conditions were favorable for buying, compared to 38% of Gen X and 18% of baby boomers. Miriam, this question's for you. Any tips for lenders who may be hoping to attract and retain young buyers in this competitive market?
Yes, millennials and Gen Z generations are really in their prime home buying years, but it is a challenging market for them right now. So I think lenders, as we discussed briefly, need to really be prepared to invest in educating these home buyers on home ownership in general, on all the programs that might be available to first-time home buyers. And they need to really invest in platforms where these tech-savvy buyers are today. So they need to invest in social media platforms and really meet them where they are, which is online.
Yeah, that's so important. David, Tony, anything else to add?
Miriam makes a really great point around lenders meeting today's consumer where they are. And at Cultural Outreach, which is part of our NAMBA family of companies, we help companies around the marketing side. And one of the things that we see based on our research is that today's borrowers, again, who are single females, millennials, communities of color, spend on average 6 to 9 hours per day on social platforms. And I'm going to say that again, 6 to 9 hours per day on social platforms. And that's where most lenders will need to pivot in terms of their outreach activities, in terms of their initiatives. And in fact, here's a little extra hint. Most borrowers are not on LinkedIn. When we ask about where are your top 5 platforms, LinkedIn is not a platform that today's consumers of this cohort are on looking for and seeking knowledge and information. So if you're a lender, you want to begin to truly look at other platforms where they're spending their time and then introduce your brand through what we call financial engagement, financial literacy, financial education to let them know who you are, what you do, and your commitment to helping them own a home and what the benefits of home ownerships are.
Yeah, Tony, I couldn't agree more with that. And it's really a whole strategy versus, maybe traditional methods of saying, okay, I need a web strategy. I'm just going to focus in on that. The mortgage topic on TikTok has had more than 3.4 billion views, right? And so that's, certainly where the younger generation is getting a lot of information. It only stands to reason that there's opportunities for them to learn about this space out there as well. And one of our top lenders in the country on their website has got more than 1,000 articles that are posted on their website in their education and learning section. So, and others, I even spoke to a lender just last week who is starting a community outreach program to try and get to disadvantaged communities and trying to educate them more with in-person events. So I think for the successful lenders out there in today's market, it's really going to require a whole strategy around the things that both Tony and Miriam has indicated at this point in order to be successful.
Yeah, really good point. You could put out great content, but if your consumers aren't there, they're not on those platforms, they're never going to be reached. So really, really good points there. Okay, so switching gears. So our survey found a couple interesting characteristics about the most likely buyers in 2024. Many who are either renting or living rent-free say they plan to buy this year. 69% of renters and 70% of those living rent-free say they are planning to purchase. Only 34% of respondents who currently own a home plan to buy in 2024. So Tony, how could that information help lenders in terms of prospecting and preparing this group for home ownership?
So Paige, there are a couple things lenders need to recognize today in terms of making a pivot as they head into the home buying season, and most importantly, getting ready for 2025 and beyond. First is, as there's been a theme, hopefully that you've heard in this conversation today, educate, educate, educate. And so the first thing that many lenders will need to do is to look at the education content that they're building out to make sure that ultimately they are providing potential consumers who, again, are very young, very diverse, female, with the right knowledge and tools to understand the opportunities today, even in a interest rate environment that we say is high, but really is a normal interest rate. Today's Dave's point, and also in terms of competing affordability in many markets. The second opportunity that lenders should focus on is also looking at and asking the question, do we have the right sales force to support and mirror the opportunities that we have? I.e., we know that over the last 3 years, single females have been enrolling in college at a rate of 2 to 1 to men. So that means over the next 3 to 5 years, a large cohort of female buyers will be in the market. And do we have, and how does our ratio look of female originators to serve and connect and engage with them? Conversely, we also know that, again, there's a huge Latino population that is bursting right now in terms of home ownership, as well as other ethnicities. And so taking a look at your sales staff and making sure that you have language capabilities as well as in-person outreach sales initiatives that are driving to be able to connect and engage at that local level in the market, as well as on social platforms, is very important for a lender to look at as they move forward in this new lending environment.
That's a great point, Tony. I found a really interesting statistic about female home buyers. 38% of Gen Z buyers are now female buyers, which is a really impressive statistic and a much greater percentage of female buyers than in prior generations. So it's interesting, but lenders need to know who to target.
Mm-hmm. And Maren, if you think about the power of the female buyer, earlier in our conversation, you mentioned the opportunity for many of today's buyers to think about that first-time home buying experience as a fixer-up. And if you just take the journey of a female, we're going to assume if 2 to 1 are enrolling in college, that means every 1 out of 2 females are going to come out of college, potentially not engaged in meeting the love of their life. And so if you think about at the age of 23, a female graduating from college this year, over the next 10 years, that represents 3 potential transactions for a lender. The first transaction is that fixer-upper that you talked about, getting them to a home that is going to appreciate, that is lower in terms of cost, that has a higher upside. Well, at some point, we know that they've gotten their job, they're graduating, they have their entry home, they will ultimately meet that love of their life and start a family. So that's transaction number 2, where they're getting married, they're having a baby, starting a family. Now you have transaction number 2 in the course of 3 to 5 years. And then we know in this environment, it's very cyclical. What goes up comes down, that in between that time, we're bound to have a refinance transaction. So by just concentrating on single females, a lender can possibly have 3 transactions over the course of the next 5 to 10 years with that one buyer.
That's a great point, Tony. And as you have access to these potential customers, they're going to be in our view, probably a little bit less rate driven and more relationship driven, right? So if you've been there with them through the journey from day one, there's a higher likelihood or potential that they may stay with you through those additional life changes and events. Certainly they're going to shop around. That doesn't mean you can't be competitive or you shouldn't be competitive, but you establish that relationship with your institution, your organization, and it becomes kind of part of your life and part of their journey as they're making these changes.
Well, Dave, and what our studies have also shown and found at cultural outreach is that typically this generation, when they like, repost, and share, guess what? That is more referrals. That's free advertising and free branding for the lender. And this generation is known to like more, share more, and repost more than any other generation.
So true.
I love that. All good tips. Thank you so much. So let's get to talking about rates again. There's a lot to be said about how mortgage rates are impacting today's market. With the upward trend over the past few years, buyers and homeowners are having to adjust their expectations. We talked about considering fixer-uppers. So in general, we found that homeowners were open to taking on an interest rate that is 1 percentage point higher than their current rate. Dave, what guidance would you give this group who are willing to settle for higher rates?
I don't know that I would say they're settling for higher rates. They're making a decision based on the point in time they're at in their life and what their financial situation is. If you think about it over the course of a mortgage, very few, if any of them, actually run to term, right? So as Tony was talking earlier about the transactions and the stages and the opportunity to refinance, you've got to look at where this fits for you in your life right now in terms of home ownership, because not making the purchase now, you're missing out on the opportunity for appreciation and growth. And just in the fourth quarter of 2023, the average homeowner had about a $20,000 increase in equity, in their home. So if you're thinking about from the perspective of a whole financial transaction, the rate's going to become, and you're not going to actually run that rate out for 30 years of living in that home, because you may transition to a next stage home, you may do a refinance. It's really about a point in time, if you're ready and what you can afford right now, and thinking about it through that lens, I think we'll get them over, rate apprehension if that's existing out there.
Good point, David. It reminds me of that saying that I love: marry the house, date the mortgage, because they just need to jump in, buy the house, and then if better rates appear later down the road, they can always refi to a lower rate.
All good point.
And the lenders, as we mentioned earlier, the lenders are offering incentives for folks to do that, right? So, the competition out there is just amazing. And as Tony was talking earlier about the makeup of the sales force, the lenders are competing for high quality sellers in their organizations who are going after the more limited number of buyers who've become maybe a little bit more rate sensitive. And so there's incentives out there that they're putting out there to compete with each other. It's not a bad time to be a buyer in this scenario, in this environment today.
Absolutely. Okay, so our next question. We've established that demand for home purchases in 2024 among our survey respondents is strong. Let's dive deeper into what they really want in a home. So their top desires from their next home purchase include a larger home with more space, more room between their home and their neighbors, with some additional yard space too, and big ticket upgrades such as kitchens and bathrooms. Tony, this question is for you. There is still stiff competition among today's home buyers, and affordability obviously continues to be top of mind. How can today's home buyers compete and ensure they are getting the homes they desire?
Well, I think one of the most important tools that home buyers have that allows them to afford as much house as they can in many markets today is the use of and facilitation of down payment assistance program. These are excellent tools in most markets, both at the state level as well as at the local city and county level, where they are having incentives that they are trying to support and provide to this generation of buyers that can assist them with being able to afford a home, and most importantly, move into that home in those local communities. And so I think, as Miriam said, you date the house, you buy the house and date the rate. One of the other things you have to think about in this cohort, if I'm a lender, is helping the buyer understand also that their first move is not their last move. And again, getting into an environment where they can take advantage of having a not competing market in terms of affordability, where they're buying that maybe fixer up that needs a little bit of love and care, but they're also getting some down closing and assistance payments from both the state or local incentives. That is a great opportunity to have a tremendous ROI, return on investment of that home that you're buying that potentially you may end up living in, 2, 3, 4 years max down the road. The return on that investment would just be phenomenal when you think about the assistance that they receive through down payment assistance program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Miriam and Dave, anything else to add?
I would just say, just opening the aperture for what's acceptable, and Miriam initiated that point with the with the fixer uppers that Tony has added to as well is we've got to temper our expectations a bit for what is acceptable if you want to get in the game for the first time, and it's very, very difficult for everyone to temper those expectations because we are pumped into on a daily basis the hours that we're spending online, television, etc., that our expectations should be up here at the top, and the top meaning brand new home with all new amenities, remodels get done in an hour, and you've got the best of everything. Everybody wants that. It's natural to want that, but it isn't also really reality, right? And it's not the reality of everyone's financial situation as well. So a little bit of a gut check of where you stand, open the aperture for what's acceptable, maybe be willing to put in the work yourself, search out, as Tony mentioned, the down payment assistance programs, and then you can really put yourself in a very strong position over the course of a 3, 5, 7-year time horizon.
Also, perhaps given the fact that so many home buyers can work remotely, maybe open up the search, right, to other neighborhoods that may have lower prices than the neighborhoods that they're, currently living in, might be an option as well. You've seen a lot of movement with the work from home, initiatives, allowing buyers to move to locations that may be more cost effective.
Very good points. And it seems really like the theme is that all roads kind of lead back to education, and how can, the lender, the broker, the realtor serve as that, that educational guide and kind of temper those expectations a little bit. Just to talk about deal breakers really quickly, relatedly, biggest deal breakers that the respondents said were not enough space, higher taxes, and a lack of privacy with homes being too close together, just to kind of share what those deal breakers were. Okay, so let's talk about refi and home equity now. Something that we actually didn't end up highlighting in the report, but it continues to be a bit of a head scratcher for our team, is the fact that 77% of respondents said they are likely to consider both refinancing and taking out a home equity loan in 2024. Dave, do you want to start us off here? Just what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this points to the emergence of a larger trend in the industry, or do you think homeowners need more education on these two options?
Yeah, I'm going to continue to ride the education horse here, Paige. There's a lot to learn about what these loan types even are if you're not kind of really in the community, right? We're all very familiar with this because we're very tied into the real estate industry, and so we do have a level of intimacy with all aspects of that, as well as lending and loan types, more so than folks who don't participate in it as much. And I think of my own children as part of that cohort, as well as other contemporaries who don't work in financial services, right? And so the difference between a home equity and a refinance loan, while it sounds very pedestrian to us and we automatically know, I would probably hazard a guess that everybody doesn't know the differences of what's going to be best for them in their situation to make that distinction of what option is going to work for them in their lifestyle right now.
Tony and Miriam, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think for me, um, what most lenders need to think about is um, how do you become that trusted advisor to the consumer, and looking at and recognizing that once you engage and establish that relationship, whether it's through attaining the mortgage and then looking at and coming back and saying, here are other solutions that we have for you in the life cycle, because most consumers are going to go through a journey where there will be multiple opportunities for that lender to provide to the consumer different various programs and resources that at that stage of their life is the right solution, the right product, the right program to help them achieve their goals and their dreams from a financial management perspective.
Mm-hmm. Here's another item that didn't make its way into the report, but we do find it to be very intriguing. When it comes to resources that respondents use at the beginning of the home buying process, we notice different generations turn to different sources. Findings show that baby boomers tend to lean on their real estate agent the most for guidance, while Gen Z and millennials turn to their lender. Miriam, what do you make of this insight?
Sage, it makes perfect sense to me because home buyers that are baby boomers have traditionally relied on their real estate agents to find the perfect home for them, and they will continue to do so. But this new generation is more tech savvy, and they have at their fingertips the ability to, look at their own search engines, websites, auction platforms to find the perfect dream home for them. And so I think it makes more sense that they, in their search, will need to seek out a lender that can help them really try to figure out what is affordable to them, what programs are available to them, and help them understand what they're able to afford so they can get that, pre-qualification letter to really help them, make their first home offer. So it makes more sense to me that they're going to depend and lean on the lender instead of a real estate agent.
I think that's spot on, Miriam. And you think of that baby boomer generation, the data or the information just wasn't available outside of the real estate agent. That was your conduit to finding out and finding education information about the homes that were available that you might be searching for. Everything now has been pushed to such a self-service environment for the current generations to do their own research on to find that they're almost like target shooting for the homes that they're going after. They're walking probably into a lender today with options that they've already found that they think will fit their needs, and then trying to figure out if they can afford that. They just don't need that conduit to get to the information that they can get to themselves off hours when they're not working, nights and weekends, or in the middle of the day on their phones that the baby boomer generation didn't have access to.
Tony, anything else to add there?
No, I think, very good comments in regards to looking at the transition of how education has flowed through the years in terms of the various different types of consumers. The one thing that I would impress upon lenders in today's environment is, again, reminding them of the importance of reaching out and positioning their brand, their content where today's young consumers are, which are on those social platforms. Although they are going to come into that bank, into that mortgage office, and ultimately talk and sit down face to face and have a conversation, as Dave pointed out earlier, they're going to come in pretty knowledgeable and really at the end of the day pretty educated, at least what they think is educated around that home buying process. And so the further that we lenders can meet them upstream on these social platforms and start those initial conversations, increases their likelihood of them coming into their office.
So getting comfortable with social selling is the big tip there. Absolutely. So let's talk auction now. Year after year, our survey has shown that today's buyers are willing to consider purchasing at auction and are motivated by the potential cost savings. 64% of respondents across generations say they would go the auction route to save money, while 42% say they like the potential for a faster home buying process. Miriam, question for you. Have you noticed more traditional home buyers shoulder to shoulder with investors on the courthouse steps lately?
Absolutely. We certainly have. Traditionally, investors were typically the buyers who purchased on auction platforms. They were looking for great deals, for fix and flip opportunities, for the purchase of rental properties. But increasingly, auction platforms have become more attractive now to home buyers as well. And there's several reasons for that. First of all, I mean, it's easy to bid on an auction platform. You have the capability of a nationwide search. You can filter by property characteristics. The closing process is very simple as well. You can do it online. So it's very attractive, particularly to the younger generations, to have all this information at their fingertips. It's also a really great resource now as well for home searches, because inventory is low, and this provides a new avenue for them to find homes at a great rate in many cases. And there are certain government programs that have made it even more attractive for home buyers to bid at auction. For example, there are federal programs now that provide a home buyer with exclusivity to purchase a home in the first 30 days that the home is placed on auction before the general public and these investors can bid on these properties. Gives them a really great competitive edge to come in and snatch a great deal on the auction platform. So for that reason, I really see this to continue to grow and the trend to continue to grow, to see home buyers purchasing at auction.
Absolutely. Tony and Dave, anything else to add there?
I would just say, as Miriam said, is certainly the opening up the more options available, right, in a constrained environment for inventory. But you also get comfort with technology as well, and the ease of the platforms to be able to to make those purchases is going to drive more folks into using that as an option, as the survey has shown us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a follow-up to that, does it surprise anyone that 45% of respondents would use a home bought at auction as their primary residence? It doesn't surprise me, given all that we've just talked about, but
no, given that the typical purchaser now is becoming increasingly a home buyer, makes sense that they would use it as a primary residence, in contrast to investors who were really buying it for the investment opportunities.
So we talked a little bit about technology there, but let's drive a little bit further on technology for a moment. Mortgage technology was popular across generations, according to our survey findings. 60% of all respondents leveraged e-sign technology for some or part of their recent purchase transaction, including 74% of baby boomers. And in fact, the oldest generation led the way here. Dave, I think this is a testament to the fact that technology is no longer optional and that everyone, regardless of age, is embracing it in the mortgage process. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally. And it's really not just that it's not optional, it's part of our everyday lives in all aspects. So it's just expected. But it's not just technology for the sake of making the process more efficient. Or taking out cost. We're using it now in our case through ServiceLink to really enhance the service experience, and certainly to create more transparency for folks as they're going through their buying process. And so that is really an expectation that you have in anywhere from ordering a pizza to taking out a mortgage, and the buying process there is having that transparency into maybe the two significant touch points in person that occur during the home buying process of the appraisal and getting to the closing table. And so taking some of the mystery out of that with technology and enhancing the service by disclosing who's going to come, exactly when are they going to come, what do they look like, what kind of car do they drive. Take some of the anxiety out of the scenario of somebody coming to your door that you don't know, who's going to walk through your house for an hour and tell, potentially, make adjudication on the value of the home that you're trying to buy or potentially trying to sell to make your life better. So, technology to deliver on the customer promise of transparency and communication is certainly an expectation that's across all generations at this point now.
Absolutely. And, just to kind of layer on there, how do you think lenders can make it even easier for borrowers to embrace e-signing technology and other tech innovations in mortgage?
And I would come back to education, right? Because an educated consumer is a better consumer and a happier consumer at the end of the day. If you were to know going in how easy the e-closing process could be, where it could be more easily worked around your schedule, your availability, your location, wherever you want that to occur, or if, for example, perhaps yourself and your spouse are located in different areas of the country and you're still able to facilitate that transaction on your timeline by engaging in an e-closing event. It's because of that capability and those the education of borrowers that we're seeing a much greater adoption in this space than we've seen in the last few years, even during the pandemic, which you would have thought would have been a huge increase there. But we're now seeing lenders setting records for the number of transactions that are closing in an electronic capability, quite frankly, because consumers are more educated and trusting of the security and the integrity of the transaction, and it's just fitting their lives better too.
Tony and Miriam, anything else to add on the technology front?
I think Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Miriam.
I was just going to say, great points, Dave. I think letting them know up front that they have these options helps them to prepare to have those set up for when they are ready to close. And there's no reason why they wouldn't want that option. It makes the most sense, and it's, really streamlines the process.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Paige, both to Miriam's and Dave's points. Now more than ever, lenders also coming out of this post, low interest rate environment, thinking about today's consumer is different than yesterday's consumer. Moving up the journey and the education piece of consumers is important. Again, typically that buyer you had 2 or 3 years ago at a low interest rate, this was their second, third, fourth, maybe fifth mortgage experience, and they knew what to expect. And so now buyers are encountering consumers who have zero, most often, mortgage experience. And so the more that they can move upstream, introductions of the process, understanding the process, and helping to provide more insights around what that will look like and the benefits to the consumer, then ultimately when they get to that crossroad, as it relates to executing those transactions, they're going to find that there's going to be very small or very little pushback from the consumer because they already understand and have been prepared for what is getting ready to happen.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Tony, because, at the end of the day, we are in a lower volume environment. And so the lenders need to use education as a point of differentiation and competition in order to acquire that customer when they're ready to buy, like Tony is mentioning. And certainly if you're up farther in the funnel in their journey and making that connection with them and educating them along the process, the better opportunity you have to capture them at that perfect moment when it's time for them to engage in making a purchase and making a buy. And if you've given them all that insight and information on the safety, the security, and the efficiency around convenience, around maybe an electronic closing, that might be the thing that drives them to come to you as a lender, and you win the deal, which are so precious now.
So be that trusted source, as Tony said earlier. I think it's so important, and all of the points that we mentioned today really drive home to that education piece. So I think that's a good place for us to end it. That about wraps up our time together. I want to thank our panelists for a wonderful and insightful conversation. It's always great to get keen insights from industry experts like yourself. So thank you so much. And for our viewers today, if you haven't already, we invite you to download the 2024 ServiceLink State of Home Buying Report for a comprehensive view of today's mortgage and housing industry. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.